dollars in failed loan guarantees. What's their answer?
What is happening, mediocre people of YouTube? I got a bit of a ride to get to where I'm going, so I thought that I would share with you guys the story, and I'm gonna have to speak loud because I got the air conditioning blasting because it is hot today in Detroit, Michigan. I thought that I would share with you guys the story of my Carvin X100B amplifier. The amplifier I have owned since 1987. That has been a key to my sound, for all these years. It's been a workhorse of an amplifier. I've used it on everything. It's been in the smokiest, tiniest little bar room to the largest outdoor concert venue, as well as some pretty large indoor concert venues. It's been in recording studios. I've used it for everything. Workhorse of an amp. It's been used, right? So, and generally I ran a 4x12 cabinet with it. Sometimes two 4x12 cabinets, depending on what I was doing, where I was at. But typically I was running one 4x12 cabinet. That was typically all I needed to do. So if you don't know about, again, it's the Carvin X100B head that I have always used, and I love those amplifiers. I own several of them, but I'm talking particularly about the one I've had forever. It was made in, I believe it was February of 1986. This is the one that I've done work to on my channel. So the story I'm getting at, and this also we will talk about, how you're putting out more power due to a lower impedance, because that topic has come up in my comment section and been argued and whatnot. So I've owned that amplifier basically all my life, since I was like 15 years old, and it's been great. We go all the way through to now it's 2022. In 2017 is when I started to have problems with it. Right around 2015, it was different. There was nothing really wrong with it, nothing that couldn't, it was alright with, but I knew that, it was probably going to need some service, because it's never had any service other than power tubes. In fact, I have the original groove tube 12AX7s that I actually took out of them. I'll probably end up putting those back in, because there was really no reason to replace them. But around, let's just say 2017, I kind of started to notice something was up. Kind of some different stuff going on, a little noisy maybe, or whatever the case was. So I remember that was the day that I hooked my amplifier to two 4-ohm speakers. My amplifier has a 4, an 8, and a 16 ohm tap on the output transformer. I hooked my two 4-ohm speakers to it in the thinking, because I was thinking about batteries for whatever reason it was. Now, okay, so if you hook two 12-volt batteries in parallel, if you hook 100 12-volt batteries in parallel, you will still get 12 volts at the end when you hook it up, right? When you hook up two 12-volt batteries in series, you get 24 volts, and so on, right? So, for whatever reason, I had that in my head regarding my speakers, and I know that's not right. But I had it in my head that, oh yeah, two 4-ohm speakers will be a 4-ohm low, because it doesn't change, right? Whatever was going through my head that day, I had it in my head that, two 4-ohm speakers equals 4 ohms instead of 2 ohms. So as we know, two 4-ohm speakers run in parallel, or running two 4-ohm speakers to one 4-ohm to each jack, running in parallel is 2 ohms. That was the day that it was really loud, and then it started kind of like the power started dipping, and I shut it off and I really didn't think much about it. The next time I turned it on, I had very low output. And I took it to a very well regarded, highly respected amp tech in this area, and I don't know what he was thinking, because he gave it back to me. He said, "Yep, it's putting out a good 100 watts now, and the reverb's fixed. It needed a reverb pot, it was broken." I got it home and it was the same as when I brought it into him. So I called him and I said, "Hey," and he's like, "That's cool." He goes, "Just bring it back, I'll get it right for you." Well, he kind of lived a little ways away, and I got busy with work and whatever not, and I just kind of forgotten about it. In the meantime, before all this started, I had started getting into messing around with tube amplifiers, right? And in fact, I still took it to my amp tech because I really didn't trust myself, doing the work. The Carvin X100B is a rather complex amplifier for a newbie that's going to get into an amplifier. It's rather complex. It's not the circuit that you want to get into. In my opinion, and the opinion of many techs, if you're going to dive into this stuff, you should really just start with the basic Fender Champ circuit and then play with that for a while and see where you're at. So after a bunch of time passed, 6 months or whatever, and I just didn't feel like taking it back to him or whatever, I decided to get into it myself, and I thought, well, I will replace the filter capacitors because they need it, right? Because it's a 30-plus-year-old amplifier, and the original filter caps weren't in. So I got some good F&T caps, and I replaced them. No dice, still. So at one point, I thought, well, maybe I took out the output transformer, because running too low of a load, an impedance, you could take out an output transformer. A lot of times you'll take the tubes out with it. Then I done some calculations on my output transformer, thanks to Uncle Doug, who taught me how to do that, and it turns out my output transformer seemed to be okay. So I didn't believe it was the output transformer. Eventually, I built my own signal trace, and I traced it out, and there's actually a video on my channel where I had replaced the capacitors in the preamp section on V1, and that's when I started getting some signal. And then eventually that just led me to, I'm just going to recap the entire amplifier, the heck with it. That way it's done. So it has all new capacitors in it. And I believe what had happened, because instead of running a 4-ohm load, I put it on the 4-ohm tap. Instead of running a 4-ohm load, I was running a 2-ohm load. Okay? My output transformer is designed for 100 watts at 4 ohms, 100 watts at 8 ohms, or 100 watts at 16 ohms. At 2 ohms, my amplifier was putting out a lot more power. It was changing the voltages inside the amplifier drastically, because it's not designed to run down to 2 ohms. Okay? This is basic shit here, people know, okay? Now when it comes to the solid state stuff, a lot of spec sheets, it will tell you, really, if you've got car amplifiers, the amplifiers for your car stereo, that you look in those to every one of them, it'll tell you how much it'll put out, how much wattage it'll put out at 4 ohms, 2 ohms, and nowadays sometimes even 1 ohm it'll go down to. And a lot of the solid state, any amplifier, whether it's guitar or whatever, they put out a different wattage at a lower impedance. It's designed to do that. It tells you this is how much you're going to put out. So with a tube amplifier and an output transformer, some transformers like mine has 3 taps. One's for 16 ohm, one's for 8 ohm, and one is for 4 ohm. If you go below that 4 ohm, and like I did, and you're running at 2 ohms, what happens is the voltages increase inside the amplifier because it's not designed to do that. And it is, in fact, putting out more wattage that it's not designed to do. So the conclusion I had come to with my particular situation and amplifier was that, you know, I had 33, 35-year-old capacitors in this amplifier, and then I ran it down to a 2 ohm load, and those old capacitors just couldn't handle the extra voltage that was going through them, which is more than likely the case. It just couldn't handle it. They were too old. Now, some amplifiers you might get away with that for a short time. You know, running too low of an impedance. And, you know, which brings you to another topic that comes down to, you know, when you take your volt ohm meter and you put your volt ohm meter on a speaker and it shows you 8 ohms or whatever, you are measuring DC resistance. You are not measuring impedance. Impedance is a totally different thing because a speaker is basically an inductor, right? So impedance is different than DC resistance. So we get a basic reading with DC resistance, meaning when we test that 8 ohm speaker, a lot of times it might say 6.8 ohms or 7.4 ohms or whatever. It generally, when you test a speaker, an 8 ohm speaker, it does not show a 8 ohm load. It shows something a little lower than that because you are not testing for impedance. You are testing for DC resistance. So that's another story that was not addressed by the genius that wants to debate these type of things in my comments section. But what I'm getting at is what he did want to debate in my comment section was the fact that you will many times get a higher wattage with a lower impedance load on an amplifier. Many amplifiers are designed to do that. My particular amplifier is not designed to do that. My particular amplifier is designed to deliver 100 watts at 16, 8, and 4 ohms, period. Okay, those are the taps in the output transformer. So, there's that. So like I said, when I run it down to a 2 ohm load, I'm no longer getting 100 watts at 4 ohms. I'm getting, you know, probably, I mean, that's really hard to say. It's really difficult to say because it's not designed to do that. But maybe even 150 or more watts because there's, you know, not enough resistance and it's not designed to do it. And like I said, the voltage is certainly increased inside that amplifier, and probably that's what took out the capacitors in the preamp section as well as you know, other sections. I'm not even sure because once I replaced the preamp capacitors and I started to get signal, I decided to shotgun the entire amplifier. It just wasn't worth it to me to, you know, I don't have a decent capacitor tester, and it wouldn't be worth it to pull out each capacitor and test it anyway. By the time I do that, I could just put a brand new one in there, which is going to be a higher quality. I did make sure I've got high quality components to put in it. And man, it's back to sounding great again. You know, it's the amplifier I always remember. You know, all amplifiers, those Carvin X100Bs are in the same zip code, but there's certainly, you know, there's differences between them, especially the, you know, I mean, you have a 6L6 model, you have an EL34 model. Now both models could run either sets of tubes, although it's not advisable unless you're changing the bias. But there was an entire line that was made to run EL34s, and those sound great too. I think they all sound great. They have fantastic clean channels. And again, I've been using that. That's been my go-to amplifier my entire life since I was like 15 years old. So there's a lot of sentimental attachment that goes to it. I gotta go and fill up my propane tank here. So I'm gonna go do that, but I figured I'd give you guys the story of my Carvin amplifier, as well as kind of clear up some debate that was going on in the comments section with a guy who is in fact the smartest person in the room. If you're in the YouTube room, he's the smartest guy around. So if you don't believe me, go talk to a guy who actually really knows amplifiers much better than I do, and he'll tell you the same thing about loads. Till next time, peace.